गवर्नमेंट जब ये पॉलिसी बना देती है तो वो इस बात का इंडिकेटर है कि बिल्कुल बच चुका है, चेंज आएगा। और इसीलिए जब जेंडर इंक्लूजन की मैंने बात की, मैंने बहुत ज़्यादा बात फीमेल इंक्लूसिविटी पर की, पर मैं अछूती नहीं रही इस बात से कि LGBTQ के बारे में भी बात करना चाहिए। तो अगर आप कलकत्ता में देखें तो मैंने देखा था एक जादवपुर यूनिवर्सिटी के मैथ्स के प्रोफेसर थे, उनके 2 बच्चे भी हैं, ट्विंस हैं, और वो बहुत सालों के बाद ही केम आउट, और उनके बाद उनको लगता है कि उनकी लाइफ बहुत आसान, उन्होंने कोई किताब पढ़ी थी और उसके बाद उनको लगा कि नहीं, तो ऐसा नहीं कि यूनिवर्सिटी ने उन्हें हटा दिया। तो हमारी पॉलिसीज और गवर्नमेंट का प्रयास दोनों ही इन लाइन विथ इंक्लूजन एंड इंक्लूजन फॉर ऑल। तो आई थिंक समय धीरे धीरे बदल रहा है, क्योंकि बनारस और ये कुछ कुछ जगह जो जैसे हमारे डाइवर्स सोसाइटी है, तो कुछ जगह कुछ ज़्यादा पेट्रियार्की होल्ड करती है अपने आप को, तो चेंज थोड़ा धीरे धीरे आएगा। और लेकिन कुछ जगह फ्लूइड फ्लेक्सिबल स्पेसेस हैं, तो वहाँ शायद चेंज जल्दी आएगा। तो इस तरह से होगा। लेकिन हम और आप आज इसके बारे में बात कर रहे हैं और सेंसिटिव हैं, ये इसी बात का द्योतक है कि किसी न किसी दिन जरूर समाज बदल जाएगा, और बदला है, ऐसा नहीं है। देखिए आज इतनी सारी लड़कियों को हम देखते हैं, क्योंकि मदर से अगर हम बात करें तो वो इमेजिन भी नहीं कर सकती कि इतनी लड़कियां यूनिवर्सिटी में पढ़ रही हैं। तो हम ही लोग अभी तुरंत अपना झोला उठाते हैं और चल देते हैं देश। आज से 50 साल पहले, 40 साल पहले कितनी औरतें जाती थी, केवल साइंस स्ट्रीम में बहुत सारी औरतें जाती थी। ह्यूमैनिटीज में तो हम बहुत कम लोगों को जानते हैं जो ऐसे चले जाते थे, जो चले जाते थे वो वापस भी नहीं आते थे। तो बहुत सारी बातें हैं। तो आई थिंक देयर इज अ मूवमेंट, देयर इज अ मोमेंट, और वो मोमेंट दूर नहीं है जब हम जेंडर इंक्लूसिव हैबिटेशन स्पेस में ड्वेल कर रहे होंगे, और शायद अपने ही लाइफ टाइम।
थैंक यू मैम।
मैं तो बड़ी होपफुल हूँ।
For being the only female resource person in this FTP. So yeah, 11% share. So you have largely talked about structural reforms in higher education in context of gender inclusion. My question is related to cultural violence associated with gender inclusion, with of course females and LGBTQ plus community, because our experiences, as you said, family background, popular culture, society, everything shape our perception towards women and other, gender identities. So, for example, in a recent case, there was this ship going from Varanasi to Bangladesh, and it went from my hometown also, and I was watching a local news channel when a bureaucrat was asked, प्रिपरेशन कैसा है, आप क्या तैयारी किए हैं, तो ही सेड घाट की सफाई हो गई है, लड़कियों का इंतजाम कर दिया गया है स्वागत के लिए। एंड इट वाज सो फनी, एंड एट सेवरल लोकेशंस आई हैव हर्ड कि सेमिनार है, सुंदर लड़कियों को ट्रे लेके खड़ा कर देना है। सो वी हैव नॉर्मलाइज्ड कल्चरल वायलेंस दैट वी इवन डोंट रियलाइज how will it impact the mindset of young girls or women in general. So, given the stereotype and like these such examples, what are your reflections on how can we bring about change in higher education institutions?
I'll ask you one question. How many conferences have you done?
I haven't counted, but more than
Have
dozen, ma'am.
Have you organized a conference?
Yes, ma'am.
So, when this bouquet thing happens, how many boys have you picked up from your group?
Ma'am, I work in a girls' college, so I had no choice. But I'm very much against कि गाना गाना है लड़कियों को बुला लो, स्वागत करना है, टीका लगाना है लड़कियों को बुला लो।
मैं तो हमेशा लड़कों को भी बुलाती हूँ, मैं उन्हें भी बोलती हूँ। तुम लोग भी आओ, फूल दो। तो हमारे कॉन्फ्रेंस में लड़के भी फूल देते हैं जाकर। तो ये मेरा छोटा सा प्रयास है इंक्लूसिविटी का, लड़कियां भी देती हैं, लड़के भी देते हैं। तो मैं जब इन चीज़ों के बारे में बात करें तो मेरा कहना है कि हम छोटे छोटे स्टेप्स ले सकते हैं इस माइंडसेट को चेंज करने के लिए, और आक्रामक होकर नहीं कर सकते। क्योंकि देखिए कल्चरल वायलेंस की एक आप बात करें, ये बहुत रूटेड है, और उससे हम डू अवे नहीं कर सकते कि नहीं ये तो बिल्कुल हम आंखें बंद कर ले तो ऐसा नहीं ना। जैसे बहुत लोग सुबह 8 बजे सोकर उठते हैं, वो किसी भी दिन सूरज नहीं देखते, लेकिन बहुत सारे लोग 6 बजे उठते हैं और वो रोज सूरज देखते हैं। तो मेरा कहना है कि जब हम इस तरह की इंक्लूजन की बात करते हैं तो हम उसको सोशियो कल्चरल कंडीशनिंग, सोशियो कल्चरल एलिमेंट, सोशियो कल्चरल एनवायरनमेंट से परे नहीं देख सकते। हमें उसी सिस्टम के विदिन अपनी पॉलिसीज को रीड करना है। जैसे कि जब हम बात करते हैं तो हम समझते हैं कि जैसे बहुत बार लड़कियों को इसलिए आगे नहीं पढ़ाया जाता क्योंकि फाइनेंशियल कंस्ट्रेंट्स होते हैं कि पेरेंट्स की शादी भी करनी है, उसमें भी पैसा देना है, तो ये सब वो सोचते हैं। तो गवर्नमेंट ने बहुत सारी स्कीम्स चलाई स्कॉलरशिप रिलेटेड, तो वहाँ पर भी अवेयरनेस फैलाना कि आपके पैसे इसमें नहीं खर्च होंगे और लड़कियों का इस बारे में जागरूक होना, ये डबल अगर चीजें हो जाए तो लड़कियां आगे बढ़ेंगी। तो ऐसा नहीं है, विज्ञान ज्योति वगैरह जो स्कीम मैं बता रही हूँ वो लड़कियों को साइंस पढ़ने के लिए आगे प्रेरित करती है, वो स्कीम्स है गवर्नमेंट। हम लोग आपको बताएं कि उसके लिए गांव के स्तर पे भी, स्कूली स्तर पे भी गवर्नमेंट जो है बहुत सारे प्रोग्राम्स चलाती है, छोटे छोटे वर्कशॉप कराती है, लोगों को भेजती है कि गांव में भी अवेयरनेस फैले। और आपको और उसमें हमको लगता है कि लड़की लड़के का कोई बात नहीं है, तो बहुत बार जहाँ पर अब तो इंटरनेट देखिए बहुत ज़्यादा फैल चुका है, पर पहले की बात मैं बता रही हूँ, हमारे यहाँ बहुत सारे तरह तरह के डाइवर्स बैकग्राउंड से स्टूडेंट्स आते हैं और बीएचयू में भी वही, जो कि कभी कुछ नहीं देख रहे थे और बीएचयू में जब आते हैं तो उनकी दुनिया ही बदल जाती है, क्योंकि वो इतने अच्छे लोगों से मिलते हैं, उन्हें लगता है कि ये भी एक दुनिया है जो कि पोटेंशियल है, जिसमें कि मेरे सारे आइडियोलॉजी को चेंज करने का। तो जब वो किसी को नहीं देखे रहते, जैसे बहुत छोटी सी बात बताते हैं, हम लोग मैं खुद बनारस से हूँ, तो मैं जब किसी से मिलती हूँ तो मेरे लिए प्रणाम करना बहुत आम बात है और मेरे लिए वो मार्कर भी है किसी को रेस्पेक्ट देने का। अगर मुझसे कोई बड़ा है तो मैं अगर ये करती हूँ तो मेरे लिए वो रेस्पेक्ट का प्रतीक है, ना कि किसी सबवर्जन का। लेकिन अगर यही मेरी कोई केरल की दोस्त है या मेरी कोई तमिलनाडु की कॉलीग है या राजस्थान की, तो उसके लिए थोड़ा अटपटा हो सकता है, अरे तुम उनका पैर क्यों छू रहे? मैंने कहा देखो मैं वही देखी हूँ और मैं वही जानती हूँ, और इसमें मैं सबवर्जन रीड नहीं करती, मैं इसमें रेस्पेक्ट रीड करती हूँ। तो इंडिया के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में जो हमारे वेरिएशंस है ना, उनको लेते हुए पॉलिसीज बनती हैं, लेकिन बहुत बार जब वो इम्प्लीमेंटेशन लेवल पर जाती है, फ्लोर पर जाती है, तब वहां पर जाने के बाद वो उस तरह से शेप अप हो जाती है। तो थोड़ी सी वहां पर हमको लगता है कि कल्चरल अंडरस्टैंडिंग, फैमिली अंडरस्टैंडिंग, उसको भी हमें अपने माइंडसेट में भी चेंज करने की जरूरत है। तो आप जैसे गर्ल्स कॉलेज में पढ़ाते हैं, लेकिन जब भी आप इस तरह के पार्टिसिपेशंस में जाएं तो वहां पर उस डायलॉग को जरूर इनिशिएट करें। और लड़कियों से भी जब आप बात करते हैं तो बहुत बार लड़कियों में भी हम देखते हैं कि एक रिजर्वेशन होता है, तो वो रिजर्वेशन को ना रहे, वर्कशॉप्स कराएं आप एक मतलब इस तरह की यूनिवर्सिटीज में जहाँ की कोएड भी हो, तो उनका एक्सपोजर हो थोड़ा और ज़्यादा, हम ये ज़रूर रिकमेंड करेंगे आपको। तो ये मेरी थोड़ी थोड़ी कोशिश ये सब रहती है। और हाँ, कुछ और नहीं समझ में आए तो एक सोनोरा झा की बुक है हाउ टू रेज अ फेमिनिस्ट सन, मैं सबको बोलती हूँ पढ़ने की, तो वो भी बड़ी अच्छी किताब है, मैंने पढ़ी और घर में भी पढ़ाई, पढ़ लीजिए थोड़ा। तो हाउ टू रेज अ फेमिनिस्ट सन, सोनोरा झा की किताब है। और आपको मैं बताऊं, मेरा एक बेटा है जो कि खाना वाना सब बनाना जानता है, तो जब वो इनिशियली मैंने स्टार्ट किया था, जब वो बहुत छोटा था, वो थोड़ा मेरे लिए सैंडविच बनाओ, मैं स्कूल से आई तो मैं कॉलेज से गई तो मेरे लिए नींबू पानी लेकर आओ, और मैं उससे तो घर में थोड़ा प्रतिवाद होता था कि मैं उससे ये सब काम क्यों करा रही हूँ, बट दैट वाज माय वे ऑफ रेजिंग हिम अप, कि कल को ऐसा नहीं हो, वो जानता नहीं कि सब काम नॉर्मल है सभी के लिए, ये लाइफ स्किल का पार्ट है, ना कि विमेन सेंटर्ड टास्क। तो हमको लगता है कि हम सबको घरों से अपने प्रैक्टिस शुरू करने की जरूरत है, और उसके बाद समाज अपने आप बदलने लगेगा, और when society changes, the academic spaces will also change.
Now we'll have one more question.
Good afternoon, madam. My name is Dr. Srividya and I'm coming from Coimbatore, Tamil Nadu. Basically, I'm a psychologist and women issues में मैं कुछ ज़्यादा ही I try to put my effort on that. The reason why my question is I'm facing a lot of contradictions of late. because of, if you would have known that, last few weeks there is a huge thing going on stopping child marriages, one part, a lot of child marriages happening. Second part is, recently I was also a part of as a resource person for women representatives in rural bodies, panchayats, and I was speaking on that occasions. And the third thing is, I'm watching all the scenario happening with women representation in STEM research. See, I see a lot of pluralization. At one point of time, there's a push for women to get into STEM research. Other part, there's a child marriage that is happening. The third part, with women representatives in rural bodies, they say that though they are being elected, it is only the male members which is pushing from behind. So, there's whole lot of things that are happening in women issues, but I still feel like I myself teach in a women's college, and where women, after completing their post-graduation, I tell you go for higher studies. They say, okay madam, it's just a stopgap arrangement for the marriage to happen. So if they would pick up a career only when there is a kind of a support from the in-laws family, or in case this family is going to be in distress. So I find a lot of contradictions happening in practical life, where women are facing a lot of things. What are your reflections on these things happening? Because you would be seeing women going pushed into STEM research one point, and women getting representative in local bodies another point. There's child trafficking happening, and women getting into a lot of toxic relationships. Still, it is not clear for a woman in the modern world. So what are your reflections? There's a lot of contradictions happening. What is your viewpoint on that? Thank you.
So, when not just in clinical research, also there was this amazing Amazon series called Panchayat, which was all about how male members, the husband of the female Pradhan becomes the so-called facilitator. He's the Pradhanji. So I think that was a very interesting take on what you talk about. And of course, when I talk about Panchayat, it has a lot of research also gone ahead. So, when I talk about these kind of polarizations in terms of women in science and of course women, whether it is Panchayat or day-to-day life, I'll call it, whether it is science or society or whatever, it's all our day-to-day dwelling. So when we talk about these structures, and that is where I kind of pitched in, that government can make policies. It empowers all women, all of us, not just women, but all men, all citizens of India, to exercise their rights in the direction that they want to. It's for us. Now, if we do not realize our agentic space and do not exercise it in the way we want, it's not the fault of the government. It's the fault of our own mindset. And that is why I'm constantly talking about policy and the implementation which will take place in tandem with social constructs. So when you talk about women's education, so from 1950 onwards, immediately after the independence, the Constitution of India was made, and it was said that everybody is equal. But only in 1975, when Samita Sen came and she started making a report for UN, she realized that, oh no, the report said, the report was a glaring certificate of the inequality that was practiced. So in terms of policy, yes, there was no inequality. But in terms of practice, there has been inequality. And that is why when we talk about all the kind of policy changes, they have to be done in line with socio-cultural constructs. So how many of us have said, okay, no to this? So, we said, we think, chup raho, koi baat nahi. But then it doesn't function like that. How many of us have made that attempt? So it's for all of us to question ourselves, because it's all of us are teachers. So before talking about policies, it's for us to talk about what are the initiatives that we have taken in terms of contributing that small thing towards gender inclusion. What have we done? So every year, I think when we write our annual progress report, we have to talk about inclusivity, and not just gender, of all things. So when it comes to syllabus, how many of us have gone back and reread about what more could be included to become more inclusive? Because these are syllabus If I talk about literature, why do we study British? When PhD students join me, I said, I'm not doing British American. I don't know. I know Indian. I'm an Indian. I will talk about Indian scenario, I will talk about Indian context, I will talk about Indian problems in my research. So, those are my little contributions in the way I implement the policy changes within my academic space and also my personal space. So, I think it's for all of us to find that negotiating space within the constricted environment. So, I think those are things that we will all have to do. And the very fact that we are discussing it is a marker that we will some point of time do it.
Thank you, ma'am. Challenge the stereotype. That's the motto. And with that, we would like to thank you for such a wonderful talk.
Thank you.
So, ma'am, you can log out.
Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing
Next time, ma'am, for sure. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
To guide us on the topic. To guide us on the topic of gender inclusion in higher education, we have Dr. Priyanka Tripathi, ma'am. Ma'am is currently serving as
This meeting is being recorded.
Ma'am is currently serving as Associate Professor of English in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences in IIT Patna. Her PhD was from IIT Kharagpur and the title was Sexual is Political, Gender, Body and Language in Indian Women, Short Fiction in English. Before joining IIT Patna, ma'am has taught for about 2 years at National Institute of Technology, Jamshedpur. She works in the area of gender studies, post-colonial literature, graphic novel, South Asian fiction, literary cartography, short fiction, censorship and censorship studies, and especially studies. So now I request you, ma'am, to deliver the talk and enlighten us about this topic.
I have always looked up to this institution, but due to some constraints, I can't make it to meet my colleagues who are part of this FDP. But I hope that these 5 days of FDP is very fruitful to all of you. So, like he said, my topic for today is gender inclusion in higher education, and my focus is the context of India. But before I go ahead, I would like to thank Mr. P.N. Singh sir, the director of IUCTE, BHU, and Dr. Gyanen Singh, who is the coordinator of this FDP program. And I think it's a wonderful opportunity because all of you are kind of my colleagues and from different stakeholders. Like when we talk about higher education, it's the university, it's the institute, it's the colleges that we talk about. And therefore, when we take up a discussion where all the stakeholders are at one place, I'm sure the deliberations that come out of that discourse benefit the system and the stakeholders together. So when we talk about education globally, it is intrinsically linked to equitable access and participation of men and women in higher education. And that has been a kind of a touchstone for the growth and prosperity of our country. Even in the context of India, if we look at the constitution and the way everything was pitched for the citizens of India, there was no discrimination as such. But in due course of time, we saw that low gender parity in higher education has negatively impacted the level of human capital, employment and economic growth. As education is considered to be a significant means of achieving women's empowerment, gender inequalities could also adversely impact women's agency. Now what I'm trying to say is that when you take up education, it's such an important marker of all sort of parameters that decide a person's agency, that if you take away that from a large section or a large population, it pretty much becomes a very decisive marker in laying that inequality background. So gender parity is fundamental for economics and societies to thrive. There was this report on in 2020 by which is called the Global Gender Gap Report. It talked about how to achieve sustainable development. And the report also went ahead and talked about the centrality of gender parity in education. And it became one of the key points in SDGs, which we call the Sustainable Development Goals 4 and 5. In Goal 4, it clearly stated that it should be inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. Under this, there was 4.5, which also noted that by 2030, gender disparities in education will be eliminated, and we will be able to ensure equal access to all levels of education and vocational training for the vulnerable, including persons with disabilities, indigenous people, and children in vulnerable situations. Now, SDG 5, which is committed to achieve gender equality and empowerment for all women and girls. Now, we have to understand the situation of India, where when we talk about the primary education, there are a lot of schemes that have been run by government, and that has led to increased participation. However, more so because of the socio-cultural contexts and constructs, we find that there is also a very immense dropout rate of these students. Now, I will talk about the implications of it and the way institutions, government, all other people involved are trying to combat the situation. But before that, I think the very idea of gender sensitization has seeped in higher education very late. Like earlier, I think there was a trend to be inclusive, but there was less sensitization. And thanks to liberalization, there was immense amount of effort put towards gender sensitization. And if you see, there is a draft National Policy for Women, which is a policy drafted in 2016. It also forms important recommendation for Saksham guidelines, which is the UGC guidelines. And they kind of reported that higher education is incomplete. The whole structure of higher education is incomplete if there is no
Ma'am, you are audible. Signal was lost.
I will take the call.
Yeah, actually, signal was lost. Actually.
Please let me know if I'm not audible. I don't.
No, you are audible, ma'am.
Connection is stable that side.
Ma'am, you are audible.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, ma'am, we can hear you now. You are audible. Okay.
Sure. So I think I was talking about the Saksham guidelines, which kind of talks about gender sensitization courses at all levels, especially at a higher education level, because it comes from the UGC guidelines. Talking about how important a unit is in the context of higher education, there is one theorist, there is one global goodwill ambassador of UN Women, Emma Watson, I would like to quote, and she says that universities are tiny utopias, a miniature model of how the whole society could look. So, you know, when we talk about the construct of family, when we talk about the construct of community, when we talk about the construct of society, and then the state and the country and the world at large, we see that it's the spread of any kind of sensitization begins from a very micro level, and then it goes on the macro level. So that is what Emma Watson also talked about, that that these universities are tiny utopias. So they will have to formulate their own ethics, their own practice, and that is how you build on what you claim to be gender inclusive or any kind of inclusivity. Now, of course, when we talk about NEP 2020 also, we do talk about diversity and inclusion at all levels. So that has been one of the key parameters on which the government has been thriving for the past, I think, a decade or so. So while talking about gender inclusion, there are three heads that I would like to touch upon. One is the faculty focus, the second one is the student focus, and the third, and also a very important one as far as the gender inclusion, the construct of gender inclusion operates, is the syllabus. Now, when I talk about policy making, etc., all these go into these threads. So primarily there are three stakeholders, and I also think syllabus is a very important stakeholder, though it doesn't have a form and flesh like the student and the faculty. But I think that decides the core of how the ideological construct of faculty and student will shape into imparting that education. So when we talk about the Indian context, both public policy, which is NEP 2020, and private individuals, which is a large demographic dividend, are beginning to see more benefits in investing in higher education, creating a higher demand for education and need to fulfill aspirations. Now, one thread that I've constantly read about the dropout rate in the context of India is that there is less awareness about where this course will lead to. Now, because we teach in humanities and social science departments in IITs, many times we are assumed that we will have knowledge of vocational kind of courses, something where there are job prospects. So there has been less awareness about that. I remember conducting at least 2 programs where we went to schools, where we kind of met class 11 students, girl students, and class 12 girl students who would be aspirants for IIT, JEE or NEET or any other kind of scientific temperaments, like we talked about the Vigyan Jyoti program, other programs, the scholarships, etc., where they could pitch themselves and go ahead and attain higher education without depending on somebody. Because in Indian context, of course, sometimes financial constraints when it comes to girl child is something that we cannot just shut our eyes on. So when we talk about women's enrollment in higher education, which was less than 10% of the total enrollment on the eve of independence, has risen to 48.6% in 2018-19. So it has been a long shift. So the total enrollment in higher education has grown considerably to 37.54 million, with 19.2 million males and 18.2 million females. So female per 100 male students have also increased significantly in central universities, deemed universities and government aided institutions. A survey which was published by All India Survey on Higher Education, ISHE 2019-20, the gross enrollment ratio of female students had been 27.3, more than that of male students, which is 26.9. Now, that is a very commendable figure, but you have to understand that these data are collated from very selective sources, and therefore the very idea of inclusivity, one is not sure if that has been pitched into it. However, we cannot deny the fact that it has been changing. Now, MEP is a very important document, a very important guideline in the 21st century, because it is the vision for education in India, and one of the key things, key parameters that NEP 2020 talks about is equitable and inclusive education and learning for all. Now, all is the word I want to highlight on. And that has been, from the very beginning when the constitution was made, the democracy, the Indian democracy was established. That was the ethos. That is what Indian ethos has all been about. We are very diverse when it comes to demography, when it comes to geography, when it comes to other issues. And there are various classifications in which we dwell. But when the policies are made, it's made for all. and there is immense amount of effort made for its implementation. Like all the institutions across India are talking about NEP 2020 and how it can be implemented. I remember there was this, I was listening about NEP 2020 a few days back, where they were essentially pitching the idea of inclusive language. And I felt the idea was good for many disciplines because there are several languages and we cannot homogenize the language part. So I think that was a very good part on the UGC for implementing of the, or MOE for the implementation of the NEP 2020. Now, because this is a key element to achieving gender equality and outlines key actions to be taken for its achievement. Now, there has been a continuous rise in the enrollment. A number of institutions and gender parity is a part of our country's major move towards improving access, equity and quality in light of NEP, which is National Education Policy. And the Higher Education Secretary Amit Khare has been emphasizing upon this when he was releasing this report. The survey findings also disclose a very sharp kind of a rise in female enrollment at MA level, MCOM, MSc levels in the last 5 years. And such positive growth suggests that how socio-economic mobility in Indian families has facilitated more opportunities for female students in higher education. Now, even in generations that have been there, even if we, we must be together, say 100 people or 150, 200, but even if we discuss amongst ourselves of how we see the approach of a family towards the female education, I think we will have several variations. There are people who will speak about how they were restricted not to go to a particular university or something like that. If I talk about myself, I think my father said, yes, you can go for higher education, but not to Delhi. So, you know, how things work, and this is not coming from somebody who was uneducated or something like that. So, you know, the restrictions, I remember one of the very famous political activists we have today, she told me that she was sent to Lady Shri Ram College only because it was a girls' college. So, you know, we operate at many levels in the context of India, and we cannot do away with that completely. And that diversity we have to take into the fold of education is what I think I would like to discuss on. So, and because, you know, we have higher education aspirants and there is a rise, but when we talk about the basic schooling and other things, I think there is a lot of inclusion, but not at the very higher education level. Now, discussing what was the gender inclusive trend as far as student focus is concerned, I have collated some data to decode the academic space in which there has been a trend towards gender inclusion, but still there is a long way to go. So, according to some statistics, in 2018-19, 43.82% of women were enrolled at the PhD level, as opposed to 40% in 2013-14. Now, I don't have the data post-COVID. There are a couple of papers I read, but they have not clearly stated about the national level data, so I did not include that. But 2018-19 data says about 44% of inclusion at the PhD level. Now, this was possible because of various measures taken by the government, such as women candidates being allowed a relaxation of 1 year for MPhil and 2 years for PhD in the maximum duration. That is 2 to 6 years respectively as per the UGC guidelines 2016. In addition, provisions have been made for women candidates to get maternity leave, child care leave for up to 240 days during the duration of MPhil and PhD. Through these, now I also saw when on 5th September, UGC came up with this scholarship for PhD. Now, this is the first of its kind where there was this Savitribai Phule, I think that's the name of the fellowship, was given to girls students for pursuing their PhD. So, very specific kind of measures have been taken for inclusion. Now, through these initiatives of the government, there has been an overall increase in the enrollment of women in higher education, and this has created a very positive impact on the gender parity index, which is called the GPI, in higher education. In 2019-2020, the figures have moved to 1.01 in comparison to 1 in 2018-19. Now, India is a very large country, and all of us will agree, and therefore, even smaller rise leads to larger numbers is something that we have to always think about. Now, the share of male students, if I talk about the engineering and technologies, I talked about universities and colleges. If I talk about the male students enrolled in engineering and technology, the overall percentage was somewhere about 71.1% compared to female enrollment, which was only 28.9. Now, the enrollment of female was lower in the IITs and NITs in comparison to the overall enrollment of women. Considering the low enrollment of female in the stream, the government decided to increase female enrollment from 8% in 2016 to 14% in 2018-19, 17 in 2019-20, and 20% in 2020-2021 by creating supernumerary seats. Now, I'll quickly tell you about these supernumerary seats. These seats are extra seats, in a way, created for girl students, and that has, in fact, I read an IIT Delhi report which says that in due course of time, about 10-15 years later, they want to have this 50-50% ratio as far as the gender inclusion is concerned. The results are visible in real terms. The total number of women in NITs have grown from 14.17% in 2017-18 to 17.53% in 2020 and 8% in 2016 and 18% in 2019 in IITs in the BTech program. Now, despite these fruitful attempts, the gender gap in the STEM field still prevails, and as per reports by the UNESCO Institute for Statistics, Indian women constitute less than 15% of the researchers in STEM field, which is science, technology, engineering, and medicine. Now, as the country has a considerable number of female students at the graduate and postgraduate levels, the Indian government is also striving to promote a gender balance at the research level. One significant step has been the Indo-US Fellowship for Women in STEM. Now, these fellowships are open for all the universities, all the colleges and institutes, research institutes, and they provide opportunity for women, independent scientists, engineers, and technologists to undertake collaborative research in premier institutions in the US for 3 to 6 months. Now, many other concentrated efforts like targeted scholarships and fellowships funded by government, multilateral organizations, and private entities like Indo-Shastri, where there is something which is from India, a body, a governing body from India and a governing body from Canada to kind of take up research, a transnational research. Also, if we talk about ICSSR, it comes with a lot of programs which are Indo-Swiss, Indo-Thai, Indo-Japan, like that. So, there has been enough attempt to build or to foster that kind of equity across various levels in higher education. So sometimes you find it for students, sometimes you find it for faculty members, sometimes you find it for senior faculty members, something like that. So I remember seeing on 5th September when UGC came up with this scheme, there were 5 schemes, and I may not remember all, but a couple of them I remember. So in one, they were only targeting these girl students. In the second one, they were targeting the new recruited faculty members, and that sort of had, it was not specific to women, but then there was also one which was for senior faculty members who had had some experience, like 10 years or so in the institution. Apart from that, they must have produced 5 PhDs and so on and so forth. So, those kind of measures have always been there, because attainment of gender parity is not just limited to access, enrollment and retention of female students in colleges and universities and institutes, but also comprises a comprehensive assessment of recruitment of female teaching staff in higher academic institutes. I may not have the exact statistics to showcase only in the interest of time, because it was just 1 hour. I thought I may not be able to kind of go ahead and talk about the different universities where recruitment is still pending for, but all of you will agree with me that in almost all the universities, colleges and institutes, there has been lack of faculty members, and more so female faculty members. Just to give you a very brief overview, because I should talk about the stakeholders, because faculty becomes, the focus is student, but it's all these places are faculty driven places. The academia is faculty led place, and therefore we cannot shy away from talking about their participation, their inclusion as well. So, a 2015 University Grants Commission report listed only 13 of the country's 725 recognized universities as ever having had a woman vice chancellor. 2017 study of Banker and Banker on women in leadership, a scenario in higher education sector, found only 6.67% of women heading institutions as vice chancellors, deans, directors, about a total of 54 women, with the gender ratio best at central universities and worst at IITs, where no female representation was found. NIRF has been one of the most vital steps in gender inclusivity as far as women's leadership position is concerned, because it was a mandate that this would be one of the indicators of ranking, and therefore over a period of time, this is a 2015 report, but if we see the data somewhere around like last 2, 3, 4 years, we will find, or maybe since the NIRF got introduced in 2015, a little later than that, we have found that there are many vice chancellors who are women, there are deans, there are directors, and there has been an attempt towards inclusivity. So there is another way in which government has tried to promote gender sensitivity and inclusivity by creating exclusive centers like Center for Women Studies, through implementation of a scheme on development of women's studies in Indian universities and colleges. Now this is a UGC-led scheme, and it kind of talks about different universities having specific centers. Now these centers in the university systems have been functioning for about 2 decades, since 1986, and have practically succeeded in playing an interventionist role by initiating gender perspective in many domains in the generation of knowledge, in the policy designs and practice. Now the curriculum has been designed and revised to meet the diverse need of Indian women and attempts to build awareness about the inclusive society. Such courses have included the silenced voices of female writers and enabled the recognition of gender-centric oppression experienced by women in different spheres. Now, a gender-inclusive pedagogical approach also incorporates a range of teaching, learning and assessing methods that are more accessible to women. I recently came across, I was at a NIPA conference in Delhi, and I remember meeting a professor who teaches political science at a very premier institute, and she told me that the revision in the syllabus enabled her to include female thinkers in the history of political thought. So she said that many female thinkers like Pandita Ramabai, Annie Besant, etc., who were not included in the syllabus earlier, found their place in the new syllabus or the revised syllabus. So, most of the times, the course content, I mean, all of us are, all of us teach here, and therefore we can't ignore the importance of the syllabus, the content that we teach in the class, because they may not be in their most formative years when we meet these students, but they are surely in their most sensitive time, and a very sensible time as well, because the entire alignment they will have towards what they will do in future and how they will contribute back to the forums that they are, that has given them everything, depends on these higher education spaces that we become facilitators of. Now, central universities like Aligarh Muslim University, University of Rajasthan, University of Madras, University of Hyderabad, Banaras Hindu University, or most of the universities that you can talk about offer gender and women's studies courses at graduate, postgraduate and diploma levels, which enable the students to not only assimilate knowledge about feminist standpoints, but also correlate it through individual and collective classroom experience. Now, I will tell you that because I teach at an IIT, and I talked about how they have not been a very gender inclusive place, and I went to a class, and it was a class of more than 150 students, and there was a group discussion I wanted to do on a particular topic, and I asked the students to to make a group of 6 each and 6 groups. You will be surprised that when these groups came up, all of them were boys. And to me, it was shock, surprise, dismay, sad, everything at the same time, because this was something that was not part of what I want in a particular class. And then, of course, though in almost all classes I talk about inclusivity, I talk about diversity, I talk about democratic existence, but still, to me, the very approach in which they formed that group was problematic. And there is where, when we talk about, and this would not have happened in universities, most of the universities, because the sensitization is a little more. The courses on different levels sensitize students for being inclusive. I mean, that is my personal perception, but of course I have also read some data that talks about it. Now, in these places, because these universities offer gender and women's studies courses at all levels, they enable the students to not only talk about the way forward as far as inclusion is concerned, but also be very sensitive towards how they conduct themselves. Because besides an inclusive curriculum, the Indian government has also introduced other schemes like schemes for women's hostel for colleges, the scheme for capacity building of women managers in higher education, menstrual leave benefits, and so on and so forth, for also female students. I talked about maternity and child care leave, but I know there are many governments. I particularly remember in the Jharkhand government, I remember that at the teacher education level, like not on higher education, I'm not sure, but at least in the school level, the teachers also get leave, menstrual leave benefits. So these are some of the ways in which government has also been trying to increase the gender parity. Similarly, given the commitment to multicultural competency at the international and national levels, when these educational institutions, engineering institutions, they realized that there is a need for gender sensitization. Even there, they started a lot of courses. Why? Because in a multicultural setup, the exposure was such that they cannot be very myopic to their cultural understanding. So while it was absolutely fine in the context of India, of a 25-year-old man never had fetched a glass of water for himself, it was absolutely problematic when you talk about the global constructs. So a number of prominent IITs like IIT Bombay, IIT Delhi, IIT Madras and IIT Kanpur included gender studies courses, electives, as electives, not maybe compulsory courses, but as UG and PG elective. I mean, some of the courses that I can talk about is Gender, Technology and Society in IIT Delhi, Sexuality, Government and the State in IIT Delhi, Thinking about Gender in IIT Hyderabad, Gender Studies at IIT Bombay, Gender and Women Studies and Introduction at IIT Patna. I myself teach that course, and other kind of courses that also include maybe LGBTQ in their PhD programs. Now, these efforts are necessary to develop understanding and sensitivity towards the need of people of minority or minoritized identities of sexuality and gender, and address the intersections that inform these identities and their relationships. Now, some of the other measures that have been taken on the syllabus level is Guide to Inclusive Writing and Speaking. Now, what do I mean by Guide to Inclusive Writing and Speaking? That in terms of identifying the gender, one cannot assume that, okay, this is the gender. So assumptions have been sidelined, rationality and information has crept in. So there has been consent classes, which is no means no worldwide since 2009. So these classes, in these classes, girls are taught to say no and are given training in self-defense. And with an aim to bring about a generational change, young boys are trained to change their perspective on gender and are given lessons to positive masculinity. For instance, they are taught to intervene when they find a girl in trouble. So, small little measures, but leading to major changes have happened over a period of time. Now, the prevalence of all women educational centers in India is another integral facet that does not cater to any separatist motive or ideological tendencies, but rather helps in fostering a community in which women have greater access to engage in a variety of avenues. I mean, I was talking about some of the universities, just female students, and that has facilitated a lot of girl students to go ahead with higher education. In 1879, there was this college in Kolkata, Bethune College, and it was the first higher education institution only for female students. But that led to the initiation of a space for women where they can challenge the existing patriarchal structure and embrace knowledge in a very comprehensive manner. We have other institutions like Cummins College of Engineering for Women, Miranda House, Lady Shri Ram College, Indraprastha College for Women, or Banasri Vidyapeeth, some of the higher education institutions that continue to promulgate education to women, thereby garnering more female involvement. So, if we look at the three threads that I have discussed, whether it's the thread of student focus, or it's the thread of teacher faculty enrollment, or we talk about the syllabus, we find a lot of issue the binary. But whatever I discussed till now folds the entire academia into the binary threads, and that does not mean gender inclusion now. So when we talk about gender inclusivity, it also has to have a LGBTQ thread now. Now, with the abolition of Section 377, we know that even in the Indian context, we have to raise concern about the sexual and gender diversity, and that has been one of the concerns by human rights activists as well. That when we talk about gender inclusion, we usually assume it's a male-female binary, but because there is a growing recognition that gender is not simple, it's not just male-female binary, but a spectrum. So we also have to be aware of the binaries that we create while charting humanitarian programs, which tend to be heteronormative and therefore reinforce the patriarchal structure of society. So While we talk about diversity and inclusion, in the Indian context, more so it has become very challenging because uh, uh, the colonial times, since the colonial times, the whole idea of heteronormativity went a shift, which kind of created a very stringent boundary as far as the binary is concerned. We are advocating for working towards equality of all kinds. NEP 2020 says it all. So when we say all, it does not exclude anybody. So in the context of changing representation, what we have to do as educators, as faculty members, we have to learn to acknowledge what remained invisible from the discussions for a long time. So it would have been easy for me to talk about gender inclusion. A DP like this, where all of us are primary stakeholders of the higher education, I think for us it becomes important to acknowledge that the space in which we practice practice also has the potential to shape our ideology. So while we shape the space also shapes us, and we are advocating for equality of all kinds, and therefore, in the context of India, we cannot refrain from taking into account LGBTQ. There is a very famous theorist, Mata Horn, who talks about LGBTQ and rights. If you are invisible in everyday life, your needs will not be thought of, let alone addressed in a crisis situation. So when we completely do away with the presence of LGBTQ community, what we have done in due course of time is that we have not acknowledged their presence. So by creating an LGBTQ friendly workplace, we can reduce stress and improve the health of LGBTQ students, faculty members. At some point of time, we can also work towards their mental health, because it's not easy in the context of India for them to kind of find a normalized space, so to say. Once we are educated about LGBTQ people, we have to step in and educate others. We have to respond when you hear very non-inclusive language. So I remember coming to IIT Patna in 2013, and in the meetings I went, nobody referred to me as madam. I was always sir, because sir was a marker of respect, and over a period of time we started saying that this is not what you can do. When you hear these kind of non-inclusive language, making derogatory jokes, using incorrect assumptions or stereotypes, voicing misinformation, you have to voice it out. I mean, the entire idea of discussing gender inclusion at higher education at this level is primarily because we have the ability, the space and the potential to combat it. And therefore, we have to be the whistleblowers when we see this kind of inappropriate comments and talk about how we can improve it. So language has been important construct as far as, so you have to use inclusive language. There are a couple of examples that I can show the contrast. In 2018, Manavi Banerjee became the first transgender principal of a college, I think Krishna Nagar Women's College in West Bengal, by the College Service Commission. At the same time, we have Ashley Tennis, an academic gay rights activist, and who was asked to leave the campus. He was teaching at the time when he was asked to leave the campus, and he had to leave this job because he was a gay. So, these stereotypes are to be challenged, and we have to be vigilant, and we have to create a safe space. We have to see that the language that we use is inclusive. We have to speak up and not label somebody as so and so. And a radical shift has to be done in terms of changing our mindset. So I think there is still time to go about it, but the moment has come. The momentum has been built, and there is no there is no stone left unturned when will be a movement from all stakeholders of the higher education. On that note, I think I'll rest and then say a thank you to all of you for being there, and I'll take questions, if any.
Thank you, ma'am. We will take some questions from the participants, if you have any. Um, can you please hand over the microphone, ma'am? Just a minute.
Sure.
Madam, thank you for such an informative lecture. It was wonderful listening to you.
Thanks.
I just have small queries. The thing is that society needs to change. Gender is basically a social construct. Social construct. So, I come from an area, Meghalaya, where we have a matrilineal system. And the policies come from Delhi dictates. So policies also should be sensitive to that particular society. There is a common this policy, Beti Padhao, Beti Bachao. So my students, they often say, ma'am, it should be Beta Padhao, Beta Bachao in Meghalaya. So we should take care of such issues as well. Thank you.
Oh yes, absolutely. I absolutely don't have anything to say, and that is why I think when we talk about gender inclusivity, we have to take into account the socio-cultural backgrounds that we come from, and especially in India, it becomes one of the key points because we are so diverse. So yes, absolutely.
Next question, yeah.
Sir, you do. Sir. Well, my.
Hello.
My.
Ma'am, next question.
Good afternoon, Dr. Priyanka ma'am. It was a mesmerizing talk. Wow, what a speed you have. Okay, so my question is regarding the NIRF. I take care of NIRF in my college, and I work for an affiliated, to Mumbai University. So there I have not seen any questions where I can include about gender sensitivity and inclusion. And if at all I have to do certain programs, what kind of programs would you suggest?
So not just NIRF. I remember I was this WGRC. We all have ICC, right? So I was WGRC, Women in Advanced Cell Redressal Committee. I was the chairperson for 5 years. And I remember every year we had to send report to Ministry of Education. Now Ministry of Education. So every year there were programs that we had to conduct, and a report had to be sent of what all we had done. So I think maybe you can get in touch with these people. You can write directly to somebody in MOE, and they are very good in responding. And some letters also come. I think we get it from the director's office because it comes to all the vice chancellors and directors. It doesn't come to the person individually. But what happens in the process is that these are mandates across universities, across colleges, and across institutes, is what I'm trying to say. So when we talk about participation also in NIRF ranking, there are a huge amount of parameters. So if you are participating in NIRF, so you go to the NIRF coordinators from each university, so they can directly contact them, and they will help you in terms of setting up the guidelines. You have to read those parameters very carefully, and gender inclusion is one of the parameters. And that is the reason you see we have now, this government has been promoting so much of women's leadership because they realized the potential of the women's participation. Because if women are not there, or for that matter any kind of gender inclusion is not there, we are leaving aside a large chunk of population in committing to the participation that they can do, in committing to the ideologies that they can come up with. And we agree that each one of us, despite experiencing the same space, may experience it differently. So even if you and I both teach in BHU, your experience will be different from mine. So So if I ask you not to, contribute to something, I am actually refraining from taking it to one more perspective. Right? So I think you can write to NIRF, and they will be. I will be happy to help you in terms of how to go about. I have never been NIRF coordinator, but I know from many sources. Also on internet, you can find out about how NIRF works. So it takes into account a lot of parameters. So one of them is about leadership, about gender inclusion.
Thank you, ma'am. We have one more question.
Sure.
Two more participants are waiting for it also. So we have few more set of questions.
Oh, it's absolutely all right.
Good
I
afternoon,
wish I
ma'am.
was there. I mean, it feels so bad not to be there. But I'm so sorry about it. Some other time I'll surely come.
Good afternoon, ma'am. First of all, I must appreciate the knowledge you have regarding this topic. Myself, Dr. Aisha Fatima from Gaya Engineering College, Fidar Sarai, and I am from Gaya, Bihar, like you. My question is on why is it important to take gender concern into account in program design and implement?
See, like I said, it's about perspectives. So I also spoke about LGBTQ. When we form any kind of structure, and if we are not inclusive enough, what we do is that we are not creating a wholesome structure or a holistic structure. And therefore, whether it is a curriculum, whether it is a curriculum design or a policy making, we have to, like, I remember there was a madam who spoke about Meghalaya. So that has not, she thinks that also is important. Yes, it is important, because when we don't take up that socio-cultural understanding, when we are building this policy, we are refraining from sensitizing one part. So when we talk about gender sensitization, it's not just female sensitization. It's a social sensitization. It's about everybody. There was this quote I talked about, which is about creating universities as utopias. So when we talk about that, even a family, everything, a family is a small unit. Then above this family, we have our community. Above this community, we have society. We have then state. Then we have, nation, and then we have this global village, what we call this as globalization effect and stuff like that. So when we take into account all these threads, we cannot say that, okay, this is not useful. Because I remember I was talking about some sort of women's participation recently, and there was a very senior professor who said that why are you talking about policies, Priyanka? You should talk about family. It all begins there. And I think that was a very important point to make, because yes, it's true. It all begins from the family. So we are not talking about sensitizing families. And therefore there are various schemes, I'll tell you, which have started in which we directly talk to students and kind of build an environment in which they think of a very inclusive temperament. So yeah, so we will not take into account one perspective or two or more if we do not form a very gender inclusive policy, and if it is not done at a syllabus level, and that is why we said that despite syllabus may not have flesh and blood, it's breathing as much as you are and I am. So like that.
We'll take two more questions. Sorry.
नमस्कार प्रियंका मैम, मेरा नाम डॉक्टर मुकेश विश्वकर्मा है। हालांकि मेरा जो सवाल है, आई थिंक उसका क्वेश्चन आपने भी उसका जवाब दे दिया है। मेरा सवाल ये है मैम कि हम लोग जब भी जेंडर इंक्लूजन की बात करते हैं, इंक्लूसिव पॉलिसी की बात करते हैं, तो अधिकतर बार हम लोग उसमें जो हमारी ट्रांसजेंडर कम्युनिटी है उसको भूल जाते हैं, जबकि हमारे समाज में अगर देखा जाए तो उनका एक बहुत ही प्रमुख रोल है, भूमिका है। हम जब बात करते हैं अपने सेंट्रल यूनिवर्सिटीज़ की और कॉलेजेस की बात करते हैं तो मैं डेटा देख रहा था, अराउंड 37.4 मिलियन इनरोलमेंट्स थे 2019 तक हमारी यूनिवर्सिटीज़ में, और जिसमें उस समय तक जो ट्रांसजेंडर कम्युनिटी के जो पार्टिसिपेशन था, इनरोलमेंट था, वो केवल 814 था, वो भी इग्नू के थ्रू। तो ऐसा क्यों है कि हम उन्हें अपने जो हमारा सेटअप है, जो हमारा स्ट्रक्चर है, उसमें हम खुद भी इंक्लूड नहीं करते हैं, और इसके लिए गवर्नमेंट क्या कर रही है? हालांकि एनईपी में ऐसे कुछ प्रावधान दिए गए हैं कि उनके लिए जो ट्रांसजेंडर कम्युनिटीज़ है उनके लिए अलग से कुछ इस तरह का इन्वायरमेंट क्रिएट किया जाएगा। बट फिर भी हम देखते हैं, जैसे मैंने भी बीएचयू से अपनी एजुकेशन कंप्लीट की है, मैं लगभग 12 साल बीएचयू में था, मैंने आज तक एक भी कोई वहाँ पे न तो स्टूडेंट देखा ट्रांसजेंडर कम्युनिटी का, और ना ही मैंने वहाँ कोई फैकल्टी देखी। हम उन्हें इंक्लूड तो करना चाहते हैं, बट अगर रियलिटी में देखा जाए तो हम उन्हें इंक्लूड नहीं करते। ऐसा क्यों?
देखिए, मैं ऐसा नहीं कहूँगी कि कुछ हुआ नहीं है। एक्चुअली बहुत सालों से ही हम बहुत एवर्स थे इस आइडिया कि एक ट्रांसजेंडर कम्युनिटी ही कम्युनिटी का हिस्सा है। तो आइडिया लेवल पर ही, सोशल कल्चरल लेवल पर ही बहुत एवर्जन था। जो डिक्रिमिनलाइजेशन ऑफ 377 हुआ, वो ही एक बहुत बड़ा स्टेप है। और आप अगर ट्रेजेक्टरी देखें उसकी, तो उसके बाद ही एनईपी में